Hi there, Alison here with another Cab Franc du jour. Today we are in Bourgueil and we're looking at the Aurélien Revillot 2018 Sur Les Hauts, Bourgueil. If the name Aurélien Revillot is not one that is immediately familiar to you, there's probably good reason for this. Aurélien is a relative newcomer on the wine scene in Bourgueil, with his first vintage being 2012. Aurélien is originally from Burgundy and he comes from a long lineage of farmers in the region. Following his studies in Dijon, he then went on to spend time working in Burgundy, South Africa, and the Languedoc, before eventually landing with the Caslot family of Domaine de la Chevalerie in Bourgueil in 2010. And it was this time with Domaine de la Chevalerie where Aurélien's passion for Cabernet Franc really started to blossom. Seeing the unbridled enthusiasm of the Caslot family for their terroirs and how Cabernet Franc has the potential to be expressive of sight. And this combined with the exceptional tuffeau soils of the côte in Bourgueil, those superb underground tuffeau cellars that have the ideal conditions for maturing wine, and the favorable climate here, Aurélien couldn't help but see a special opportunity to set up his domaine in Bourgueil. And when he set up his domaine, he just started with a handful of parcels in the communes of Benais, Restigné and Bourgueil. And his first vintage of 2012, he only made one wine, the Sur Les Hauts. Today, he's grown the domaine to a mere 3.5 hectares of Cabernet Franc vines, and he has a teeny tiny 19R of Chenin Blanc. And Aurélien is the veritable definition of a one-man show. I had the pleasure of visiting Aurélien for the first time last spring, and before this visit I had no prior knowledge of Aurélien's domaine or his wines. And my first memory of this visit was that upon arriving at the domaine and meeting Aurélien, he immediately pulls out this laminated map that shows the lieux-dits and the different communes in the Bourgueil appellation. And on this map, he has a collection of these small color-coded stickers that show the locations of his parcels. And then he goes on to say that with the exception of the Sur Les Hauts, his focus is making cuvées parcellaires, so single lieux-dit wines. And he believes that Cabernet Franc has the potential to showcase place in the finished wine. Now, if you've known me, you will know that I was absolutely delighted to be hearing this. And if that wasn't enough, then he pulls out another map that has the underlying geology of the Bourgueil appellation, and he's telling me about the nuances of the soils on the côte and the slope, and that, how those soils are different from soils that are on the flatter sides closer to the Loire. And, I've got two nerdy maps on the hood of my rental car, and I am trying to contain my excitement for what I am hearing and seeing. But I cannot help but think that I found my spirit animal vigneron in Bourgueil. Now, in addition to the Sur Les Hauts, from these 3.5 hectares of vines, he is also producing 4 cuvées parcellaires. So he has the Les Aubry and Grand Mont, which are in Bourgueil and Benais respectively. And he's been producing these two wines for some time now. And then as of the 2020 vintage, he's now producing the La Bretache, which is in Restigné, and then also the Les Brunetières, which is in the commune of Ingres-de-Touraine. And these two wines will be released in 2024 and 2025 respectively. Now, looking a little bit closer at Sur Les Hauts, as the name suggests, the parcels for this wine are from the higher spots. So we're talking the slopes here. And this area of the slope, or the côte in Bourgueil, is concentrated in 4 of the 7 communes in the appellation. So we have the commune of Bourgueil, which is on the western side of the Changement River. And then we have the communes of Benais, Restigné, and Ingres-de-Touraine, which are on the east side of the Changement River. And all of the parcels for this wine are coming from vineyards that are on the east side of the Changement River. So I'm going to take a quick second to talk about the viticultural area here of the côte on this side of the Bourgueil appellation. So this area of the côte on the east side of the Changement River is this gradually sloping narrow band of vineyards that follows this forested area that's to the northeast. We have the Forêt du Benais, and then we have the Forêt du Rochecotte. And this forested area defines the exposures of these vineyards. So the vineyards will actually follow the tree line here in a bit of an arced shape. So in the commune of Benais, the vineyards have a bit more of a southern exposure here on the côte. And then as we move east into Restigné, the vineyards are a bit more south-facing. And then when we get into Touraine, the vineyards actually shift again because the tree line shifts and they have a bit more of a southwestern or even western-facing exposure. Also, it's important to note that in Benais, the côte is at its widest point. So in the western part of the Benais commune, the côte is around 1,000 meters wide, and then it narrows as we move east. So when we get into Restigné, the côte is around 800 to 900 meters wide, and then into Touraine, the côte is around 500 to 700 meters wide, and then in the easternmost part of Touraine, the côte is at its narrowest point in this part of the appellation, which is about 250 meters wide. Now, it's also important to note that in the commune of Touraine, we're actually closer to the Loire River because of how the Loire River takes this dogleg towards the northeast up towards Tours. In Touraine, we're about 2.5 to 3 kilometers north of the Loire River, versus in Restigné, where the heart of the côte there is around 5 kilometers north of the Loire, and then in Benais, the heart of the côte there is around 6 to 6.5 kilometers north of the Loire. This is important because the Loire is a major moderating influence here, and that will determine the microclimates of these vineyards. So in Touraine, the vineyards are closer, so they'll be a little bit warmer versus, say, in Benais, which are further set back. So these vineyards will be a little cooler, and they'll have a slightly longer growing season as well. In terms of soils, the majority of the vineyards that are on the côte in this part of the Bourgueil appellation will be on the Middle-Tronian white tuffeau chalk, and this is lying between 50 and 70 meters above sea level. There is also a slightly narrower band of vineyards that are on the Upper Tronian yellow tuffeau chalk as well. And I always make these distinctions between the tuffeaus because they have different properties, different densities, different water holding capacity, different mineral content, which impacts nutrient uptake, and this will all impact viticulture. In terms of topsoil, we will find different depths and textures across the côte in this part of the appellation, but in general, we will find a higher percentage of clay in these soils versus what we would typically find on the ancient alluvial terrace or what we would find on the soils that are on the recent alluvial terrace closest to the Loire River. Now, looking at this wine a little bit closer, this is coming from 4 distinct parcels, and we have 4 different lieux-dits. We have the Les Rosés, we have Les Caves Caillots, and the Les Vlodons, which are all in Benais, and then we have Les Blottières, which is in the commune of Touraine. And these 4 lieux-dits total around 0.97 hectares of vines, and the planting dates range from 1976 to 1988. So we're dealing with 35 to 40-year-old vines here. And then in terms of topsoil, Aurélien told me that it's varying in terms of depths, but in general, we have either a silicious clay or a sandy clay in his parcels specifically. And I should also note that Aurélien is farming all of his vineyards organically as well. Now, from a winemaking perspective, Aurélien takes a very classical approach in the cellar. So we're talking hand-harvested fruit. He double sorts, so he sorts in the vineyard before picking, and then once the fruit gets back to the cellar, he'll sort again. The fruit is also destemmed, and he'll prepare a pied de cuve about 2 weeks before harvest, and that's what he uses to start his fermentations. For the 2018, the fermentation was in fiberglass tanks. And in terms of extractions, Aurélien takes a very gentle approach. So he does some light pump overs just at the beginning to ensure that the cap stays wet. And then after that, from day 7 onwards, he pretty much doesn't touch it. So it's maceration through infusion. The total time on skins is around 3.5 to 4 weeks. And then he will press the wine off the skins, and he will initially separate the free run wine and the pressed wine, and then he'll reassemble that. And then the wine is transferred into barrel, and he's using 228 liter neutral oak barrels, and the wine ages for about 5 to 8 months. Then he'll reassemble that wine, age it in tank all together for about 6 months. And his goal with this wine is to bottle it in the spring, 2 years following the vintage date. So this was bottled in May of 2020. So with that said, let's get into this wine. So the nose, first and foremost, is very pure. It has a lot of clarity, a lot of translucency, and it leads with this wonderful fruit basket of fruit. And these fruits are definitely a little bit on the sweeter side. There's a certain luminosity and sunny character to the fruits. And the fruits lean a little bit darker, so I'm getting a bit of black raspberry, there's a bit of black currant, a touch of cassis, a touch of blueberry. There's a little bit of a Bing cherry thing happening here too. But in general, the fruits are a little bit sweeter, which makes sense. 2018 was a little bit of a warmer vintage, so there is this plushness to the fruit. And the fruits lead here. The pyrazines definitely take a bit of a backseat, but they are there. And I should note that Aurélien has the best term for the herbal undertones in Cabernet Franc. He refers to them as the noble vegetal notes. And I think that is just the most perfect way to describe them because it suggests two things. A, that they are inherent in the DNA of the grape, which it totally is for Cabernet Franc. And for me, it also suggests that these notes, these herbal undertones, these earthy undertones in Cabernet Franc are something that should be, celebrated and respected. And, so long as they are in balance, they show this wonderful plethora of herbal and earthy undertones. And these are notes that we should be praising in Cabernet Franc because it's just what the grape is all about. And I just love this term that Aurélien uses. And I've used it a number of times since in conversation. And I just think it's fantastic. So on the nose, the fruit, like I said, leads here, but we are getting some nice herbal undertones. So there's a bit of like a thyme, bay leaf thing going on. There's a bit of an evergreen note, not quite cedar, something a little leafier than that, but there's definitely an evergreen component. It's a lovely violet profile here. There's a bit of spiciness on the nose as well, but very primary to start. This is a young wine, but a lot of purity and clarity to the nose. Now, on the palate, those same fruits carry through really beautifully. And I would say that the palate leans a little bit more spicy and a little bit more savory. So those herbal undertones come through a little bit more on the palate. There's a little bit more spiciness on the palate. And the spice is a really interesting profile here. It's like a mix of, I would say it's almost like a Chinese 5-spice powder. So it's like, Sichuan peppercorn, cinnamon, star anise, things like that. It's a really interesting spice profile on the palate, which I quite like. Now, in terms of the acidity is very vivacious, very refreshing, and I love that because it's providing a nice counterpoint to the fruit profile, which is a little bit on the sweeter side. So that acidity is providing this nice cleansing effect. In terms of the tannins are very distinctive, very silky in the mouth. He's managed these tannins just so beautifully. They're very elegant, but there's this little bit of a chew on the finish, which I think is very distinctive. And I have had a number of wines coming from Benais specifically, and this commune is known to produce Cabernet Franc that is a little bit more structured and tannic, and you do get a sense that this wine has a little bit more robust tannins, but they're beautifully managed for sure. The fruit envelops the tannins very beautifully. And this wine is extremely well balanced. So the way the fruit, the acid, and the tannin are working together is creating a really harmonious wine. And I think it's really quite lovely. Overall, there's a certain density and breadth to the wine. There's a certain fleshiness to the wine as well. We are dealing with some clay soils here, so that again makes a bit of sense. But the acidity is providing a nice backbone and a sense of focus with the wine as well. The wine, it has some power, there's structure here, but it's also, there's also refinement, there's a thoughtfulness, and there's finesse here for sure as well. And, as much as this is Aurélien's entry-level wine, this wine has a lot of structure and concentration and a lot of capacity for aging as well. So I think this will hold easily for the medium plus term, 5 to 10 years for sure. And it should develop really nicely over that time. When I visited Aurélien for the first time, I was just blown away by his wines and the quality here. And he is without a doubt a rising star in the Bourgueil appellation. And if you're not familiar with his wines, these are definitely ones to keep on your radar. He doesn't make a lot, he doesn't have a lot of parcels, but these wines are really special. And I think he really feels the grape and feels, what it can do. And I think there's this wonderful symbiotic nature between Aurélien and Cabernet Franc. And I think he totally gets it. And so far, my experience, I'm loving it. And I can't wait to continue to follow Aurélien and his journey and this estate further. If you've had the wines from Aurélien Revillot before, let me know what your favorite cuvée was in the comments below. And of course, as always, I will be back again soon with another wine. Cheers.